this one, I want to talk about being chosen and what it means. I made a video about this before, and it was cool. It's just, at the time, my social skills were really bad, and the source material was still very new to me. So it was one of those videos where I was more or less going through the stages of just jotting the information down and just putting together just something to reflect on, more or less. So it was just more or less a rough draft of this information. So I wanted to revisit the topic and speak on it in a more refined fashion, you know, since then, what it means to be chosen and like everything else. So, in summary, what it means to be chosen is that in life you're a protagonist. What is a protagonist? Well, a protagonist is like a main character in a movie. This is what you are in real life. You're like a main character in a movie. And because you were chosen, it's your responsibility to always do what the main characters do in succession, in succeeding. So whenever you watch a movie and you see these people, the protagonist, which is the main character, the guy, the struggle, what is it that they're trying to do? And so this happens various ways in various films. There are different challenges. Maybe they solve some sort of mystery. Maybe they heal some sort of person. Maybe they discover some sort of way to safety. Maybe they transcend the matrix. Maybe they overcome it some type of way. This is really kind of like the path of your life in common storylines. And the next thing to really keep in mind as being chosen is just why it is that you fight, alongside why it is that you're the one that's expected to be the protagonist. Why you fight is you fight for a better day. It's that simple. You fight for a better tomorrow. If you as a chosen one do not fight and you fail, then the future will become worse. Really reminds me of like certain video games, like somewhat Streets of Rage, somewhat Sonic the Hedgehog. It's like in the beginning, there's like this situation. I think like Gunstar Heroes is like a really good example of it. It's like there's just like this almost like sudden seeming catastrophe that could be happening, looming in the midst, and it's like you and these other people, you have to take on this issue in like the sky. Sky Sanctuary, for example, like in video games, really illustrate this well. It's like here you are, like the Sky Sanctuary. You get to the top floor, you fight against this ultimate boss, and you do this to literally save the world. Because if you don't do this, then some sort of freedom will be lost, some sort of um, sacred treasure will be taken, some sort of you know amazing possibility will not come into existence. This is what happens when you, as a chosen one, fall short, and this is why you fight. Furthermore, in a similar way, this is also kind of synergistic as to why you were chosen. Like it's like I don't want to bring in too much confusion, but it's like you're chosen because you are the one that is to fight. And for this reason, this is why the world moves around you the way that it does. There are certain things to existence relates to good and evil, and this is just this is your role. your role is to be good. This is what it means to be chosen. Now, you could go off the rails, but this would play out similar to the way chosen stories do. A prime example of like a chosen one that goes off the rails is like the Green Ranger story in Power Rangers. So like you can go off the rails, but ultimately that that's just a story arc. You still are chosen. Now, if you fail, you still fail the ultimate mission. So for this reason, you are to fight. It's kind of that simple. Now, from my experience, you are inclined to win because you're built for it, because everything in your life is always shaping you for your next fight. And another thing about your next challenge, like your next obstacle, whatever it is fight or do, whatever you are protagonist of, whatever your strengths are. Like for example, me, I'm a fight. Whatever your purpose is truly what you are protagonist of, and it's kind of in the realm in which you were chosen. But no matter what it is, it's still a great feat. Like there could be a movie simply about, events that transpire within just, you know, a 1 block radius. However, those events could be tremendous. It's in that same regard that your capacity as someone chosen may not necessarily transcend all af- all aspects of of the world, even though what you do has a great impact on the world. All chosen people have a great impact on the world. And so you kind of live like the protagonist in any movie. And I think the best way for someone to be chosen to kind of get an idea of what they can expect out of life as someone who is chosen is that they can find a movie that they can really relate to and get an idea of what the characters in the movie struggles are, because those are going to more than likely be the struggles of you in real life. There's something about writing, where writing comes from, in that when you write, you consider aspects of characters, and it's in their some of their most interesting moments that you oftentimes will write about certain characters, whether it be an angry character when they reach their limit, or it be a weak character when they reach their threshold and they transform into, they overcome their fears and they become a stronger person. So you kind of write characters in these sort of points, these interesting points, and you do this to sort of answer different questions and challenge your mind and, explore different, things that make these points interesting. And in doing this, you really do define real characters and real personality traits that are very common. And so when characters are written, when protagonists are written, all protagonists are chosen ones. So if you find a protagonist that you can relate to, a movie that you can relate to, then you will realize that the struggles that are within that movie or the struggles of that character are going to similarly be the struggles of your life, and they will be parallel. You will know they will be parallel because you will also be able to relate to similar movies, and you will be able to identify things in your life in a similar fashion. You'll have the same character arc. I think a lot of this has to do with also the fact that the forces of good and evil are really what kind of are really like a really like a core commonality between writing and in reality, and these things are also true in reality. So it's like in this same regard the protagonists of reality are the same protagonists that are written in comics. It's like, or like the same protagonists that are written in anything, whether even it be something like a comedy, something like Garfield or something like that. These sort of the sort of the limits and the defining attributes of these sort of personalities are true, you know, and so that's what it means really to. I mean, that's kind of basically what it's like to be chosen. Who are you chosen by? You're ultimately chosen by God. The reason being is because God is really God, and the mechanics of the universe are really the mechanics of the universe. It's in this same regard that you are truly chosen, because it's like the mechanics of of the universe that we live in are truly the mechanics of the universe, and because God is truly God. And so the whole idea is that if, as long as a chosen one, you do what you're supposed to do, you should be okay, because God is on your side, and God is always doing everything to prepare you for whatever it is. And then, let's say for example you fall short, you always have God's guidance. So it'll shape you into who you have to be. A really good example of this is superhero movies, where it's like, the superhero, doesn't really know they're a hero, and then they may find something, or they may, do something, and it will open their eyes up to a level of the world they didn't know exists, and they decide to take a side of good and evil. I think like Harry Potter could be an example of this. Like King Arthur could be an example of this. Like Power Rangers could be an example of this. Shazam is a really good example of this. These are things that you go through in your life. So they will take shape, and uh, you will go through them. Now, you may remember them as traumatic, but what you don't or may not be aware of is that as you're going through them, they are happening theatrically, similar to the way that they happen in the movies. And this part is a part of it that's somewhat unreal. Is that as a chosen one, this is the way everything transpires. It transpires theatrically. You're prepared for things theatrically. You really are prepared for things theatrically, because that's genuinely the way that God operates. And I know it sounds kind of wild, but truly speaking, that's kind of like how God operates. He kind of operates theatrically, and it's your responsibility to just basically do what you know you're supposed to do in those situations and make it through. If you try to, like, let's say for example you go off the rails, then you will, I mean, you can derail yourself, but it's not going to stop your antagonist, and it's not going to stop your reality. So the sooner you get in line with what you're supposed to do, the sooner your life can you can have more clarity and understanding of your life. Otherwise, you're just gonna more than likely live the protagonist story, and typically the protagonist story of trying to fit in with everyone is gonna be kind of like an outcast. Like, like you're probably gonna be like a Peter Parker. You're probably gonna be like a Logan. You're probably gonna be like a Harry Potter. You probably are going to be like a Cinderella. So you're probably going to be those things. If you're not those things, then you're probably going to live a shallow existence. You're just not going to be able. If you are truly chosen, it's going to be probably hard for you to blend in, unless you have someone that's really like protecting you and just keeping you, you know what I mean, especially safe. But once again, this is unlikely you know, because you're kind of more or less dealing with God. And I also want to put God in the context, because there's like, talking about God from like a biblical, like church perspective, and then there's just talking about just God, like straight God. And it's not to take God out of context to say that, God's not like, the Hebrew God from the King James Version of the Bible, but it is to take God out of the church context in which God is pretty much like been preached through, through them. It's like, all right, but the thing about God is like God is really God. So your life, or the overarching situation is that evil forces basically are just here to destroy the world. It's that simple. And so God just pretty much chooses people to try to fight the evil forces to try to raise the world, so that the world can continue on. If if the chosen people fail, then the world falls. The more chosen people fail, the more the world falls. The more chosen people succeed, the more the world rises. So we can live in an existence where, we have things like in the movies. Like for example, in the movies, there's this aspect of like peace and tranquility across society. That level of society has existed. It's just in order for that level of society to be realized, you have to succeed in, whatever it is that you do. You have to stay the course and you have to do the right thing. So that's basically the way it works. And that's basically what the thing is, the mission is. And the reality is that God ultimately just wants to, for the most part, go to war. So you just gotta be just ready to go to war. You gotta be ready to go to war out for whatever you were chosen to do. And so God pretty much prepares you for that. But again, like the big pitfalls to this are in not answering the call by spinning out and just going AWOL, which is very common, just rebelling against the situation. Like another pitfall is failure to identify the situation, not able to ever pass any tests because maybe you don't know that you're chosen, or maybe because you keep trying to do wrong. That's very common. You keep trying to do wrong. Like, maybe for example, you'll be very hard headed. It's for this reason that a lot of chosen people fall. And you can't cloak your identity. No matter how hard you try to fit in, your your spirit and also God isn't going to let it happen. And see, this is another thing too about God is like God will straight up end you out here. And this is something that like a lot of people get confused with, like they think like when God's like Jesus, like they think like God's not gonna really get them up out of here. Because Jesus is very forgiving, that God has like patience, so like God is willing to like sit there and like, wait for them all patiently and stuff like that. God will really end your life. So with that in mind, not only will God will end your life, but the enemy will end your life. Which just kind of is goes to say that like all this special treatment that you're getting isn't for nothing. If you take it for granted, then you know then it's all then it doesn't change the fact of like the battle that you're fighting. And then a lot of chosen people fall because they fail to identify, and I can speak with on this personally. But it's like if you don't actually know what you're supposed to do, then never really have like really good reason. So I don't know, I think it's very likely you like lack motivation and you'll just wonder why the world is always coming down on you. Another big issue about being failure to identify is you will sit there and try to interpret information like and not understand why you end up dealing with this sort of like Peter Parkering effect and stuff like that. Like you don't really understand that. And so you may try to use analytical reasoning to try to make sense of it, and it probably could maybe somewhat drive you a little left when you realize that things that work for other people don't work for you. And the reason being is because of how much negativity you attract. You'll be like, man, why do I attract so like you'll interpret it as you're attracting negativity. It's not that you're necessarily attracting negativity. It's just simple fact that you're not recognizing the call that you were supposed to answer at some point. You're just not recognizing things because you were conditioned to be the champion of good, but also because the whole entire world sees you as the protagonist, or because you are viewed from the eyes of being chosen, you are going to be the one that's always going to be attacked for the greater evil. And if you don't know what's going on, then you just won't know what's going on, and they're still going to go after you, or they're still going to oppress you, because simply your presence is a threat. And your presence is a threat because you're conditioned to be chosen. So for this reason, even the way that you may not even realize this, but the way that you interpret the world is truly through the eyes of the protagonist. Now, you may be rough around the edges, or you may have certain aspects that are not perfect. These are probably framed in your mind as even worse and even more traumatizing. And so basically the way that it basically works is there are people that are chosen, there's a war going on, it's constant between good and evil, and you have to basically do what you have to do. And so at certain times in history, there have been a lot of success. It's just the core of people needs to sort of be in line. It needs to be right. Like, for example, from the 60s all the way up into the 90s, there's a consistent arc of progress in the world. There's a consistent arc of improved living. There's a consistent arc of you know innovation. There's a consistent arc of love. There's a consistent arc of improvement, and it can be a lot of things. But there have been a lot of times throughout history that life has not been that good. There have been hundreds of years throughout history that life has not been that good. There has not been that much progress. There has not been that much innovation. And so that arc is a continuum, and it can continue, and it does continue, but it can only continue granted the world is healthy and it's able to flourish. And that's granted that it can be facilitated. When darkness reigns, everything ultimately dies. And so God has all sorts of methods of doing whatever he has to do, but when it comes down to the black and white of it all, um, God's ultimate God for the most part uses people to fight wars. There are other chosen people, and so it's on you to find them and also to awaken them. And this is really where it comes in handy in knowing the context of what it means to be chosen, because the world will also will realize will follow them just the same. I think the best thing you could do, you'll realize, is lead by example. And um, and the best thing you can do is overcome the issues, the tests that you have. The people who are going to teach you lessons. Try your best to learn those lessons and try to take those lessons into fight the boss, because it's like Castlevania. You can sit there and find certain things if you're smart and you do what you're supposed to do, or you can just get obliterated, and you will literally get obliterated for a very long time. But again, there are others, and so it's on you to connect with them, and also to, if you can, hopefully awaken them. You know, you can unify with them. Again, you can look at film. What are some of these groups? How do they work? This is similar to the way that things are going to work for you. That is really what it really amounts to. That level of progress, for that level of progress and innovation to continue at a steady pace, is the result of all of the chosen winning and the forces of good ultimately winning. And so when you're chosen to undo that. You're chosen to keep society on course. You're chosen to keep the light. You're chosen to harness the light. You're chosen to do light work. You're chosen by God. But don't look at God as this like biblical Santa Claus Jesus figure. Understand that God is radical and God is more or less a warlord. He's more so dark age than what most people perceive. So, you're just basically doing what he has, planned. Understand that the forces of darkness ultimately want mankind to die. So it has they so that the end of the world can so that the world can come to an end, because they just want the world to come to the end. A lot of the forces of darkness, that this is what their purpose in life is to do, is to thrive on these people. And so humanity is stuck in the balance, and that's basically what the ultimate sort of struggle of individuals are on an individual basis, in terms of being worthy of, uh, going to heaven and whatnot. Can you manage this spiritual war, or do you conform to it? Do you fold to it? Do you ultimately get caught up in the wave of destruction? Chosen ones are sort of these sort of pillars of this war. They impact the pressure on an average individual, and they basically are the ones that are at the forefront of a lot of these issues, that before they even are set off into society. And whether they know it or not, this is what their fight is. And so that's what it means to be chosen. So I just want to make sure I said everything. But yeah, if you stick the course, if you stick to the course, everything it should be all right. Everything should be good, and you'll find purpose and fulfillment in what you do. And I really truly believe that you'll be able to get ahead of things way more than you would ever had imagined. To the point where it's like, it almost seems as if you're on cruise control, and as if you do have a complete normal life. It's just the sooner you can become aware of the struggle, the better.
So, the way I like to conclude these is by sharing other things that I'm working on. And right now, one thing that I'm writing is Roberta, and it's one of my Pinterest writings that I shared during this video. So, if you like art and you may have an interest in concept writing like I do, then you can check that out in the comment section. I have it pinned there. With that said, that's my time. All right, peace.